Okay. Hello. Good morning, everyone. We are here once again for our Saturday talks on behalf of the United States Spiritist Federation. And today we are very happy to have a friend from abroad, Adam Osborne. He's going to talk to us about the Golden Rule. And Adam is a co founder and coordinator of Kardec Group in the UK, having previously had the opportunity to learn about Spiritism and work in Spiritist centers in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And he works professionally as a translation manager and has contributed to English translations of Spiritist materials, including videos, letters, articles, and books. And he lives in Oxfordshire, UK, with his wonderful wife, Valeria, that we call Val.
Yeah,
Hi, Val. I'm sure you are here watching your husband.
she'll be
And,
watching, yes.
oh, yeah, that's so wonderful. And thank you so much, Adam, for
It's a
being
pleasure.
with us. And we have been trying to do this in order to, as much as possible, to present good talks and disseminate the spiritism, the spiritist set of values to all the English speaking public. And but before we start and before he starts giving his talk to us, we always do a small prayer, so that we can feel the presence of the good spirits and the protection. So we invite you all to be with us, to join us in this prayer of gratitude for having the blessing of being together as friends, as brothers and sisters, to pursue our spiritual evolvement, to find answers, to broaden our understanding about our mortal souls. We understand that we are always assisted and protected by the good spirits, whatever we put ourselves to disseminate goodness in the world. So we ask protection for our friend, our dear guest speaker today, and for all of us that are here watching, eager to learn a little more about this doctrine of love and enlightenment. So, Adam, now it's with you. Thank you so much again. And hello, everyone. And thank you for joining us once again this Saturday.
Okay, thank you, Shisara. And thank you to all our friends in America, in the UK, and indeed around the world joining us on Facebook and YouTube. So today, it's an honor for me to be able to be with you to talk about this thing that we call the Golden Rule, which hopefully quite a few of you have already heard of, but no, don't worry if you haven't. So we're going to look at a few aspects of this. So first of all, what is the Golden Rule? Where did it come from? Why should we be concerned with it? And what does Spiritism itself tell us regarding the Golden Rule? So first of all, what is the Golden Rule? Well, the Golden Rule is a label that we put onto a set of reflective phrases, which are guidelines that we've been using for a very long time now. And perhaps the best way to represent these guides is with the following phrase: love your neighbor as yourself. Now, I'm sure most people watching have already heard of this before, but what does it actually mean? Do we understand what it means? Should we be concerned with it? Does it have any impact on our day-to-day lives? And is it easy for us to apply to our lives? So let's look at a few of the attributes of the Golden Rule so that we can perhaps understand a little bit of what it really is. So, it is a basic guide of how we should treat others, the need of respect we should have towards each other, the law of reciprocity, that we get what we give. The golden rule, it's part of the laws of cause and consequence. It helps us to understand the connections that we have to each other and the connections we should have to each other. So within family, within society. And as such, it shows us how we should treat and behave within our position within society. It shows us how and why we should have empathy for the situation that others are in. It helps us to understand the usage of patience and tolerance. It helps to justify and explain exactly what charity is. And those are just a few of the attributes of this thing called the Golden Rule. And there are many others, but these are the main ones that I'm going to be focusing on today. So, where did it come from? We've just had a quick view as to what it is, some attributes of the Golden Rule. But where does it come from? Many people think it first appeared in the New Testament. Some people think it's newer, some older. And so I've got a little historical timeline here, and the dates that I'm going to show here may not be the exact dates, they're just to give us a rough idea. So we're going to start around 4,000 years ago, 2000 BC, in a country called Egypt, and look at the things called the laws of Mat. Now, Mat, she was one of the Egyptian goddesses, and they had many, many goddesses, gods and goddesses, and she was worshipped around 4,000 to 4,500 years ago, because the Egyptian empire started roughly about 5,000 years ago. And Mat herself, she was the personification of truth and justice. And all the guides that she brought, all the advice that she brought, was seen as the ethical values, the ethical, moral values that the Egyptians should follow throughout their daily lives, and were seen as the norms of society, both for the incarnate and the discarnate world, because remember, the Egyptians were very spiritual in that respect. And so all of these guides, which were passed along from oral traditions, so spoken traditions, were formed into what's known as the 42 negative confessions, which were a list of declarations such as, I have not stolen, I have not attacked any man, I have not acted with any evil rage. And these were compiled into what's called the Book of the Dead. And all of these phrases were normally inscribed on the tombs of people, so that once they get to the afterlife, Mat would give to them the correct level of justice that they deserve. And so part of the laws are present in a little story called The Eloquent Peasant. And we know that that story was compiled around 1850 BC. And within that story, we have a little message which says, that which you hate to be done to you, do not do to another. So here we go, 4,000 years ago, possibly a bit longer, we have the first message. Well, actually 4,000 years ago, we have the first written message with these moral guidelines there for people to consider their behavior towards each other. So let's move forward a bit more. I'm going to stay in Egypt, go to about 1300 BC, and look at the events of this guy called Moses and the Exodus. Now, I'm sure that you guys must have heard of this chap here. I know that Alvaro Mordecai last week was talking to you about the plagues of Egypt. Well, obviously, that story comes from the same story of Moses. And no, so who was Moses? He was an adoptive Egyptian prince who later became a very important prophet, a prophet for the Hebrew people. And his story is that when he discovered his heritage, because he didn't know that he was Egyptian, so he didn't know that he was from the Hebrew tribe, he thought that he was simply Egyptian. But once he actually knew his heritage, that he was from this group of slaves, he saw with fresh eyes how the slaves there were being abused, and he then became very rebellious, and he had rejected his adoptive family and fled Egypt. He then became a shepherd, and one day he was out looking for sheep, for a lost sheep, and he came across a burning bush, which communicated with him and said that it was God. And then that same God went to him and said, look, Moses, I want you to go back to Egypt, free these slaves, free all your brothers and sisters, free the children who I want to have freed from there. And so Moses went back, and we have that story with the plagues, which Alvaro was talking about last week. And part of the whole Exodus story, we have these other communications from God, these communications which are called the Ten Commandments, where they're there on the side of Mount Sinai. God comes along, thunder and lightning, and brings these commandments, such as, you shall have no other gods but me, do not worship idols, do not kill, do not commit adultery, do not be envious or jealous. No, actually, commandments isn't the correct word for these. It should be duties. But, common vernacular is commandments. And so, with these 10 duties, we have these phrases which then lead us to other parts of the Exodus story. So in the books of Exodus and Leviticus, we have the following instructions. In Exodus, we have, love your neighbor as yourself. A pretty clear and direct message there. And in the book of Leviticus, we also have the following. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your kinsfolk. And so these commandments, these instructions, these duties, as well as many others that we can find in the Old Testament, were guidelines for the 600,000 people who fled Egypt, that was potentially around 10% of the whole global population at the time. And these guidelines were there to help people learn how to live alongside each other, especially considering that they were going to spend 40 years together in the desert before they reached the promised land. So from Egypt, let's head east even. Let's head east and go to Nepal, to around 600 BC. And we're going to look at the story of a guy called Siddhartha Gautama. Now, hopefully many people have heard of the name he took on later, Buddha. And Siddhartha Gautama, he was born in southern Nepal in roughly 630 BC in an area called Lumbini. And at that time, all of the Indian religions were going through a philosophical transformation. And this guy, Siddhartha, he was born into a very wealthy family who tried to protect him, shield him from the outside world. And one day he realized that he would have to suffer illness, old age, even death at some point. And he got upset with this, so he left home in order to try to find the root cause of human suffering. And he spent many years going from one teacher to another, trying to find insight into this. But then after many, many years, he then almost gave up. And it's said that on almost the last day of him giving up, he went and sat under a fig tree, started to meditate, and reached enlightenment, reached nirvana, and then transformed into becoming Buddha, a very insightful, philosophical, and spiritual teacher. And so within Buddhism, the one of the core teachings they have are the scriptures known as the Tripitaka. And in these, Buddha gives lots of different lessons, including the following: hurt not others in ways that you yourself would find hurtful, and putting oneself in the place of another, one should not kill, nor cause another to kill. So already we're seeing very similar messages to those from Matt in Egypt, from Moses, to those here that Buddha was giving. And so let's stay in that same area, a bit more east now, going to China to around 500 BC, and we're going to talk about Confucius. Now, Confucius, many people may know, was a philosopher and politician, and he was born into a military family, and he worked in many government roles. And many people came around to the village where he lived and actually saw him as being a good role model for proper conduct, for righteousness. And as I said, he worked in the government in different roles. He was a politician. And many of the works attributed to him are part of a collection called the Analects, which are various sayings, various parable-like stories. And in one of them, we can find the following: what you do not wish for yourself, do not do to others. And then there's another story in there where a disciple comes along and says, Master, is there any one word that could guide a person throughout life? And the master sat there and thought and replied, how about reciprocity? Never impose on others what you would not choose for yourself. So again, we're getting a very similar story coming through. And so all these different cultures, so we've seen Egyptian, Indian, Chinese cultures, very similar stories. And now, so we're going to go to Greece now, to a guy called Socrates in 400 BC. Now, excuse me, Socrates was an orator, a speechwriter. So essentially he was a lecturer. And he was born around 436 BC. And people say that he lived to be about 98 years old. And his contemporaries were Socrates, who was born in 470 BC, and Plato, who was born in 428 BC. And one of the works of Socrates is called the Nicocles, which were a set of lectures he actually gave to the people of Cyprus. And in there, he tells them, do not do to others that which angers you when they do it to you. Practice nothing in your deeds for which you condemn others in your words. Practice nothing in your deeds for which you condemn others in your words. Now, it's actually quite possible that these were the thoughts and teachings of Socrates, which this guy, Socrates, Socrates, wrote down, because actually Socrates himself never wrote down any of his ideas. So we don't know, but either way, great teachings from that time. So from Greece, we're now going to head back east to India. And this is a story which I really like, to roughly around the same era. So around maybe 400 BC, maybe a bit before, maybe after, and look at something called the Mahabharata. Now, the Mahabharata, for those who haven't heard of this before, is a very important Indian scripture, which was compiled by a writer called Vyasa. And the story goes is that the deity, the elephant-headed deity Ganesh, came and helped him and was the scribe of these works. So Ganesh was there writing down these works. And it's a very long story, very important story, very dramatic story, which were of events that supposedly took place around 1000, 1500 BC, but some people think that they happened nearer to 3000 BC. And part of the Mahabharata is a very important scripture called the Bhagavad Gita, which is central to all the stories about Krishna, who is important within Hindu faith and the Hare Krishna faiths. And within all of these scriptures, these stories, these poems, we have the following passage, which is actually part of a conversation. It says, "One should never do something to others that one would regard as an injury to oneself. In brief, this is Dharma. Anything else is succumbing to desire." So, what is Dharma? Well, Dharma is the cosmic law. It's the behaviors needed for righteous duty, the righteous living. It's the laws of the universe itself. And here in the Mahabharata, this central work to a faith which has many, many gods, they are equating good behavior to being part of the universal law. So from India, we're going to move back a little bit and go to Persia and look at the religion of Zoroastrianism. Now, Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, as he's known in some languages, was born around 1000, 1500 BC, so possibly around the same time as Moses. He was a very insightful person and actually considered to be one of the first philosophers. And his teachings are regarded as having influenced various philosophers and various religions throughout the years. And of course, the religion of Zoroastrianism, which is founded on his teachings. And he was a spiritual person, spiritual teacher, teaching about monotheism, the idea of a single God. And also teaching about needing to reduce rituals within religious ceremonies, the ideas about an afterlife, and ideas regarding cause and consequence. And there are two main teachings from him which I want to read to you now. The first one is, "Whatever is disagreeable to yourself, do not do unto others." The other, "Whatever you do not approve for yourself, do not approve for anyone else. When you have acted in this manner, you are righteous." So again, he's bringing these teachings, trying to compare behavior, consequence, cause and consequence, getting people to think, to philosophize. We're going to stay in the Middle East, jump forward a bit to 50 BC, to a little country, hopefully you've heard of as well, called Israel, and to talk about a guy called Hillel the Elder. Now, Hillel the Elder was actually a very important figure within the religious and political landscape of both Israel and the province of Judah, because there are two separate countries at the time. He was born around 110 BC, and he studied all the Jewish religious laws and became a very respected rabbi, founding one of the main schools of thought called the House of Hillel, a school which still exists today. There are Hillel houses in America. And there they also talked about all aspects of ethics, theology, religious practice, daily life, and they're openly discussed, talked about, that people were encouraged to talk about these things openly, without prejudice. And Hillel, for anyone who's read the book Paul and Stephen, he was actually one of the leading presidents of the Sanhedrin, a court, a place of judgment, which we know about from the book Paul and Stephen. And Hillel was also very important in spreading ideas of peace and unity everywhere. And one big idea that he came up with was the idea of social justice order called Tikkun Olam, which was the concept that everyone has the direct responsibility for not only their own moral, spiritual, and material welfare, but for that same moral, spiritual, and material welfare of society in general. So knowing that if you want others to be well, you have to treat them well. If you want yourself to be well, you have to treat others well. And there's a symbiosis there. And he came up with various phrases, and these are attributed to him and written down in various books, various commentaries as well. And the first main phrase that he's remembered for is, "Do not judge your friend until you have stood in their place." Now, that's good. But there's also a story which I want to tell you. And some people may have heard of this story before. So, there were two main religious schools at the time, religious philosophical schools, the House of Hillel and the House of Shammai. And people saw them as sort of competitor, but actually they got on quite well. Now, one day, story is that a non-believer, someone who didn't have any faith at the time, went to this guy called Shammai and said to him, "Look, Rabbi Shammai, you are a great teacher. And to prove this, while I stand on one foot, I want you to teach me all that there is in the Torah." And Shammai said, well, he knew that this was a trick, and he thought, yeah, this is going to be pretty impossible. I can't teach this person everything in those 5 books, the old Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, etc. I can't teach him all of that while he stands on one foot. And he thought, okay, I know what, I'll send him to Hillel. So he said, right, go after Hillel, ask him. He'll be able to teach you better. So the guy goes to this guy, Hillel, and says, "Rabbi Hillel, you're regarded as the greatest teacher. Teach me all that there is in the Torah while I stand on one leg." Hillel thought for a moment and then agreed. So as the guy was standing there on one leg, Hillel said very calmly, "That which is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. That is the entire Torah. And the rest is just commentary. Now go and study." And so Hillel was there trying to summarize the whole concept of the Torah, the Old Testament, as in a simple explanation. Do not do to your fellow what you would not want done to you. That which is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. So he was bringing some very deep insight that time, just over 2,000 years ago. And so we're going to jump forward now, just a couple of years, to someone who perhaps you've heard of as well, again in the same country, this guy called Jesus. Now, Yeshua ben Yosef, or Yeshua, son of Yosef, also known as Jesus of Nazareth, son of Mary of Nazareth, was a rabbi and philosopher, born, we know, roughly around 4 BC, because the calendars don't actually add up. So, I'm very confident that most of you know of him, his story, the teachings he provided, the story of all his disciples. So I'm not going to go into that. But there are a few passages from the Sermon of the Mount, which are in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, which I'd like to mention. So in the Gospel of Matthew, we have the following. So in Matthew 7:12, "Do to others what you would want them do to you. This is the meaning of the law of Moses and the teaching of the prophets." So when he says the law of Moses, he's talking about the Torah, the Old Testament. Well, it wasn't called the Old Testament at the time, but these were the laws of Moses. And also the Jewish laws, the laws that rabbis such as Hillel helped to spread. And the prophets were all the major and minor prophets which are in the complete Old Testament, which included Moses, Noah, Jonah, all these others. Now, nowadays, these guys would actually be considered as mediums because they brought communications from high spirits, from God, and others to help other people. And the other passage I wanted to mention is from Luke, verse 6, item 31, sorry. Do to others what you would want them to do to you. So again, we're having a clear repetition of these same basic teachings that we know had started at least 2,000 years beforehand. And continuing with the Gospel of Matthew, we have in chapter 22, verses 34 to 40, and this is something we find in the Gospel according to Spiritism in chapter 11. We have this item, which, let me just give you the background to this. So, Jesus was there one day at the temple in Jerusalem, talking, philosophizing with all those who wanted to listen. And that's actually something that only the rabbis were allowed to do. And various people were there asking him many questions, trying to test him to see how well he knew the scriptures, the Torah, all the Jewish law. And one of the people who comes up to him was a Pharisee. And the Pharisees were actually a philosophical and spiritual group who actually accepted the idea of discussing and commenting on the Torah. And they also believed in the immortality of the soul, the concepts of a spirit, an afterlife, reincarnation. And in fact, the formation of the rabbis started with the Pharisees as well. And so this Pharisee, someone who's spiritual and open to talking about aspect of religious scriptures, comes up to Jesus and says, "Teacher, Rabbi, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus replied and says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. That is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." So again, the strong confirmation of the importance of looking at our behavior. Confirmations of the same golden rule message has been passed down in different forms, written down for at least 2,000 years by this point, known throughout many different countries. And, there are obviously many other moments that we could talk about, we could see how other religions talk about this: Islam, Sikhism, the African religions, the North American and South American indigenous religions. But what about Spiritism? We're here within a Spiritist context at the moment. So what does Spiritism, this philosophy that Allan Kardec brought to us 160, 170 years ago, what does that say about the Golden Rule? So, Gospel according to Spiritism, like I mentioned before in chapter 11, I just read something from there. Chapter 11 itself is dedicated to this topic, the topic of love your neighbor as yourself, which is the Golden Rule. And the items that this topic talks about are the greatest commandment, law of love, selfishness, faith and charity. And item 4 of this chapter, Kardec himself mentions the following as a reflection of that passage of Matthew that I read a moment ago. And here Kardec says, "To love your neighbor as yourself, to do to others as you would have them do to you. This expresses the most complete form of charity because it summarizes all of humanity's obligations toward their fellow beings." All of humanity's obligations toward their fellow beings. I think that's pretty clear, isn't it? But Kardec continues, "We can find no guide to take as an example that is more guaranteed in this respect than that we should do to others what we would have them do to us. What right have we to demand that they behave in any better manner, that they be more benevolent or more devoted to us than we are to them? So here, Kardec is helping us to understand the moral aspects of the Golden Rule, that no matter how we write it, rewrite it, rephrase it, paraphrase it, as he says, the most guaranteed guide, the best guide for us to follow regarding our behavior is this, is exactly what we mentioned here. Let's go back to love your neighbor as yourself, to do to others as you would have them do to you. For Kardec, that was the solid guide. And in this same chapter, we have the message from the spirits of Lazarus and Fenelon. And these help us to reflect a bit more about our behaviors, our attitudes. And so, chapter 11, items 8 to 9, the message from Lazarus first. In order to advance towards this goal, each person must overcome their instincts, that is to say, to perfect their sentiments. And Fenelon carries on with this and says, love is of a divine essence, and everyone, from the first to the last, has a spark of this sacred fire in the bottom of their hearts. And when we read this message from Fenelon, what I'm always reminded of is going back to Genesis in the Old Testament. We're told that God creates humans and gives them the divine spark, that God gives the breath of life into man, the sacred breath, the sacred fire of life. So I like to link that fire to the fire the spark that Fenelon is bringing to us here, the spark of sacred fire that we have in our hearts, that we have within us, this essence that's brought to us for us to keep with us all the time. And so within the same chapter, in item 12, we have this item about selfishness. We have a message from the spirit of Pascal. And they say here, if charity reigned on earth, then evil could not prevail. It would fade away in shame. It would hide, seeing that wherever it went, it would feel out of place. And so these are just a couple of items from one chapter of the Gospel according to Spiritism. And within this one chapter, we have, in very much the style of Kardec, an objective overview, an analytical observation, an idea of methodology, a hypothetical conclusion regarding the Golden Rule. So a very scientific, very philosophical structure, very Kardec structure to understanding this thing of love your neighbor as yourself. But of course, it doesn't end just there within Spiritism. Within the Spirit's book itself, we can find various items related to this. So chapter 12 of part 3, the moral laws and moral perfection in the Spirit's book, these talk about the attitudes and behaviors we need to consider for our evolution. And the topics that this talks about are virtues, vices, passions, selfishness again, characteristics of a moral person, and self-knowledge. Now, question 893. Which is the most meritorious of all the virtues? All virtues are meritorious because all are signs of progress on the path of the good. However, the highest virtue consists in the sacrifice of one's own interests for the good of one's neighbor, without ulterior motives. The greatest merit is that which is based on the most disinterested charity. So we have a very firm message here about helping others without wanting anything in return. about treating others with the same level of respect that we would want. And as they say here, without ulterior motives. Without ulterior motives. Question 918. By what signs can we recognize in individuals the real progress that will raise their spirit within the spirit hierarchy? True moral individuals are those who practice the law of justice, love, and charity in its most complete purity. Now, let me just say, this is Kardec's comment here. This isn't an answer from the spirit. This is Kardec's comment to this same question. True moral individuals are those who practice the law of justice, love, and charity in its most complete purity. If they interrogate their conscience concerning their actions, they will ask if they have done to others what they would want others to do unto them. Now, this is followed up by a really great question regarding how we can apply the Golden Rule. Question 919. What is the most effective means for improving ourselves in this life and for resisting the draw of evil? And they answer, a sage of antiquity has told you, know thyself. Self-knowledge is therefore the key to individual improvement. Now, these are just a couple of items from the Spirit's book, which we have as a great reference of the Golden Rule, where it's come from. And, you know, some of the snippets, some small pieces of what Spiritism says about it from the Spirit's book, from the Gospel according to Spiritism, about how it can impact us and how we should consider it regarding our own personal transformation. And so, why should we consider this now? Well, let's face it, we've been going through a very, very bizarre time in the past couple of years. So we've had lots of political tensions between various countries. Here in the UK, we've had tension due to this thing called Brexit. We've had social tension in relation to the Me Too scandal, the recent Black Lives Matter scandal. Well, not a scandal, but, you know, common knowledge. Viral pandemic. This viral pandemic, which has required us to socially distance ourselves from friends and family. Economic upheaval, which has come out as a result of that. Bankruptcies, redundancies, company closures. All these tensions that have happened over the past couple of years for different reasons. So lots of anxiety, lots of tension, lots of stress, lots of disruption. And so within all of this, not everyone is able to find their own inner balance, the inner balance that they need to counteract these disturbances, the inner balance they need to live in a peaceful and harmonious way. And many people have lost sight of why we're here on this planet, what improvements we can make to ourselves. No, just a few weeks ago, people were talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. Does that still matter now? It seems like it doesn't. From some of the things that have been happening recently, it seems like it doesn't matter anymore. You know, coronavirus. We started a lockdown where everyone had to isolate. People don't seem to care about that anymore. We're a very strange being. Many of us seem to have lost sight of true aspects of fraternity, solidarity, of caring for each other, of caring for society, for everything. Many people have lost sight. Not everyone, but many. So what can we do to adjust our behaviors, our attitudes, our perceptions, so that we can apply the Golden Rule to our daily life? Well, let's look again at some of the aspects that we saw earlier. So, law of reciprocity, law of cause and consequence, position within society, patience, tolerance, charity. And now let's look at how we could potentially apply this to ourselves. 1. Listen to others. How much do we really listen to others? How often do we really take the time to listen to what people want to say? Taking care of the details, the tone, the emotion. It's not that often. Practice empathy. Think about how and why someone may be behaving, why they may be reacting in a certain way or saying certain things. We need to be patient. We need to be far more patient than we are, because not everyone talks in the same way as us or expresses themselves in the same way as us, or they might just take a few more moments to do something, to say something, to complete something. We don't like it when people rush us. So why would other people like it if we were to rush them? We need to consider each other on this planet as siblings. Full stop. We all come from the same source. Spiritism teaches us this. We are all brothers and sisters within humanity. We have the same starting point and the same final goal. Avoid criticism. Avoid giving criticism towards others, because we don't like it when others criticize us. We don't like it when people judge us. So why should we do that to others? We need to consider the hardship, prejudice that others have suffered, especially right now. We need to use empathy, put ourselves in their shoes. Like Rabbi Hillel said, put ourselves in the other person's shoes. We cannot understand someone's life unless we have had exactly the same experience. We can't understand their background unless we've had the same experience. We need to be calm, because we can only help others and ourselves if we are calm enough to think rationally. We sometimes fly off the handle a bit. We react without thinking because we're not calm. The moment that that we're able to calm down, bring our thoughts together, we can think better again. We can react in the right way. We need to learn how to elevate our thoughts every single day. Through meditation, through prayer, through any spiritual connection that you feel comfortable with. Spiritual connection to your mentor, guide, so that all of us can raise our thoughts to find that spark of inner peace, that spark of this fire that we have within us, this divine fire, so we can find the calmness that we need in order to not be irritated with other people, to not be impatient with other people, but to be calm, relaxed, patient, and tolerant. We need to be a friend. We need to be a friend to others. It may sound very simple, but we don't do this enough. We need to be a proper friend, because there are times where we would need a friend too. It's no good just using empty words, very flowery words as to saying, lovely person, great person. Unless you're a proper friend to them, they won't be a proper friend to you. Because one day we may need someone to come along to help us, to give us a bit of uplift, for us to talk to. So if we're not there for other people, they won't be there for us. And as such, we need to be loving and compassionate, to respect others for who they are, for how they are. We can't change other people, but we can change ourselves. We need to be loving and compassionate with ourselves, because it's only after we're loving and compassionate with ourselves that we can truly be compassionate and loving with others. And in fact, all of these items, listening, empathy, patience, criticism, we have to learn how to apply to ourselves, because it's only through that, once we know how to apply this to ourselves, that we're able to truly progress along our spiritual evolution, the paths that we have in front of us. So we need to learn how to care for ourselves, respect others as well as ourselves. And I'm going to leave you with just a couple of items here. So in a recent BBC interview, the Dalai Lama said the following: "The whole world should pay more attention to how to transform our emotions." How to transform our emotions. And I think we can agree that that's so valid for right now. And it was valid a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. It's been valid for a very long time. And this same message that the Dalai Lama brings is the same message we can see in books of Andre Louise, John Giangelis, in the teachings of Buddha, Zoroaster, Matt, Moses, Jesus, Krishna. And so perhaps now, after 4,000 years of having this message written down, we can finally start to learn how to consider this and apply it to our daily lives. And there's just one more thing I want to bring to you, a final thought. And I don't quite remember where I heard this, but for me it's quite clear. We are all on the same path, just wearing completely different shoes. So thank you very much for your time and patience in listening to this. I see that there's quite a few comments already, and so I'm more than happy to take any questions right now. But again, thank you for this opportunity. And if anyone wants to connect with Kardec Group, here are details on the screen. Can connect to us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Beautiful talk, really interesting. And yes, we have some questions here. So let's start with this one. Is from MDib. Is the coronavirus a sign that it is time to change our values?
Absolutely. Yes. We need to change our values. Why has this virus come about? There are many social, ethical reasons. There are many spiritual reasons why this has come about. We know that one reason, I'm not saying it's the only reason, one reason why it's come about is because of humanity's desire to exploit nature, to start eating animals and foods which aren't actually there for human consumption. And so that's why we've had the cross-contamination, the transmission of disease from one animal to another, which has then found its way into the human food chain, into a place where it's then spread. So yes, from that aspect, we need to change our values. From the spiritual aspect, absolutely. Because again, we need to find out, what can we learn from what's going on right now? And like I said a moment ago, even though we've had this situation of lockdown now for, in some countries, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, people are losing sight of fraternity, of solidarity, of actually caring for each other. We see people going out onto the streets without using masks, without using any kind of care or consideration. And they think, well, I'm okay. You might be okay, but other people might not be. We don't know enough about this virus yet. We have to follow the guidelines that we have in keeping ourselves safe in order to keep others safe. So there are many things that we can learn from this current situation, including how well we should be taking care of each other. The amount of prejudice that people from China and Asia received at the start, or even recently, that has to end. We can't blame specific people for this. It's a humanitarian problem, not a local problem.
Very well said. Yes, agree. So, this one. Why many spiritists seem to believe that Jesus' teachings are brought by him for the first time, ignoring all the historic facts that you explained?
I wouldn't necessarily it's spiritist believing that. We have to remember that the Bible was rewritten around the year 300, 350. It's been rewritten a few times since, but through different forms of translation. And so we know that it's been adapted each time. The Council of Nicaea, if anyone's ever seen the documentary In the Master's Footsteps, it talks about this. The Council of Nicaea, they purposely modified many aspects of those teachings to conform to, at the time, Roman ideals. And so just getting rid of a lot of the historical thoughts. But we can't just blame that. We can't put any blame onto that, because even nowadays, people use false information. We've got this rise of fake news happening all the time.
Oh, yes.
When put it this way, when I was at school, we were told that no one lived in America until Columbus went there. That's wrong. That's nonsense. We were also told that there's no such thing as electricity until 1900. That's just absolutely wrong. Nowadays, we have so much information available for us that we need to find the way to use that information. Dig down, like Kardec tells us as well. Dig down. What's the truth behind there? And so, so going back to Bailey's question here, I think it's mainly because many people who are Spiritist, I'm not saying all, but many are from the Catholic Church originally. And many of these people may have with them the information that they were taught through that Catholic doctrine. And like I said, we do know that there have been modifications there. So that may be one reason, but there are probably other reasons. But we don't always like to research ourselves, do we? But take the opportunities, look up things, not just on Wikipedia, but get other books, get many books, try to find different sources of the same information to find the best information, to find the truth of what's out there.
Thanks. Yes. One from our friend Daniel Santos. Thank you, Adam. So why is still a challenge the application of the golden rule to ourselves first?
Ego. The negative aspects of our ego, pride, selfishness, lack of humility. Because when we try to apply the golden rule to ourselves, and this is a great question, Daniel, it's a great question. When we try to apply this to ourselves, what happens? We have to look within ourselves. We have to consider who we are, how we act, how we behave, how we react. And we sometimes see something that we don't like. And we go, oh no, well, I've just touched a nerve there. I'm starting to look at something which I think is wrong. I don't want to go into that anymore. This is why people who have to go through any kind of therapy, especially for addictions, they have such a hard time, because they get to a point where they see something which upsets them and they don't want to find the courage to work things more. And so most of us find it difficult to find that correct courage, to find the faith that we need to be able to go, okay, let me accept that I've done something wrong. Let me accept that there's something I need to change within myself. And let me find the way to apply all of this to myself. Because sometimes it's far easier for us to be loving and caring to other people than to ourselves, to people outside of our family, to even people within our family. So sometimes that is just out of shame. Sometimes it's out of our negative thoughts. So it is a challenge, but we have to look at ourselves and think, why is it being a challenge for me?
Okay. A very long one from Jusara here. We have heard that there is only one truth, and you have presented this to us by showing different philosophies bringing the same concept. So, despite of the importance of this truth, we are still very much marching opposite sides. Do you believe this pandemic may somehow put us back on the right track?
Just a very good, complex question there. I hope it will help to instigate some level of rationale in everyone. I don't personally think it will put everyone back on the right track, because we've had other pandemics before. We've had other things happen globally before. We've had 2 main world wars. We've had the various Middle Eastern wars, the Iraq wars that have happened. We've had other things that have happened. The Spanish flu pandemic that everyone talks about as well. Even go back to the Black Death, the plague. We've had all these things happen, yet we still haven't learned from it. If it's taken us 4,000 years to not yet learn fully the concept of the golden rule, I don't think we're going to learn fully the full teachings of this current pandemic within a short couple of months. It's going to be a long time before humanity progresses enough. But on the other hand, those of us who have this consciousness of betterment, of wanting to improve, we shouldn't be discouraged. We should take this opportunity to learn about ourselves, to learn how we can improve ourselves, to find how we can put ourselves on the right track. Because society will look at us and go, okay, that person's doing this, they're doing that. Perhaps I should look and do roughly the same kind of thing. Role model. Where do the ideas of role models come from? Where we look at someone and start to see what they're doing and try to imitate them. So instead of us trying to impose positive action on others, just commit to positive action yourself. And that way we can transmit, we can vibrate out these positive thoughts, energies, actions towards everyone else.
Yeah, I think this comment from Philip is very appropriate, right? As it has been said, be the change we want to see in the world.
Exactly. Right? No, absolutely, Philip. We can't sit around wanting the world to change for us. If we want something to change, and if it's something positive that doesn't harm anyone else, go and do it.
Yeah, I agree. Now, we have a comment here I want to post just to ask if you heard of him. From Nesip Esber. Words you are using remind me of Mevlana Celaleddin Rumi, who is a Turkish Sufi. Thank you, Mr. Adam. Have you heard of?
Thank you for that comment. No, I haven't heard of this person, to be perfectly honest. But then again, if we look at Sufi Islam, which is a spiritual form of Islam, it wouldn't be surprising to me, because within Islam as well, you have very strong beliefs of taking care of society, taking care of each other. So thank you for that comment. I'll definitely look up this person.
Okay. All right. I think that's all with the questions. Thank you very much, Adam. We really appreciate it. It was a beautiful lecture, beautiful lesson, and I hope we can all try to put in practice those lessons that we have learned. Before we end, I would just like to invite you all for next week's lecture, which is going to be given by Kirsten de Mello, and it's going to be Ways to End Suffering with Joanna De Angelis, which I think is going to be a very interesting presentation also. Kirsten, a good friend of ours. So I invite you all to be here with us Saturday next August 8th, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Okay, so we are going to end with our prayer, thanking our spiritual benefactors, for another opportunity of being together, of being united. We ask them to protect us throughout the week, to guide us, and to inspire us so we can follow all the teachings we have just learned. We ask for the protection of all those that have been going through difficult times with the pandemic, for those that losing loved ones, losing financial stability, jobs, for those losing their lives and going back to the spiritual world, that they may find resignation, acceptance, faith, so we can all together overcome these challenging times and become better individuals, better spirits. We thank you all for being here with us. We thank our Master Jesus for once again guiding us and protecting us. And we ask permission to close this conversation. Thank you. Thank you all, and we hope to see you next week. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you very much.